Chapter 4. Mel looked into the woods but couldn't see a thing. It was too dark. She put down the shovel and pushed away her jitters. She had no reason to feel scared. There was no crime in Glacier. Pops didn't even have a lock for the cabin door. Their worst fear was that a skunk would sneak into the house and stink everything up. Mel took a step forward towards the cabin, and then she heard it. Grrr! At first, she thought it was thunder, but the sky was perfectly clear. Grrr! Mel stopped. Her heart pounding. Should she run? Stay still? What was out there? She remembered Papa's story about the porcupine. Was this animal trying to scare her away? She swallowed hard and slowly turned to look. She froze. The shape of an enormous animal hovered at the edge of the woods. A second later, it stepped out of the shadows into a pool of moonlight. Mel gasped. The creature had shaggy fur and dark eyes. But it was the hump that rose up between its shoulder that told Mel that is what it was. A grizzly bear. Mel blinked. It seemed impossible, like it leaped out of Kevin's imagination. Except that Mel could see it. She could hear it, and now a voice in her mind was screaming in panic. Run, run. I wonder if any of you guys know what to do if you do see a bear. A lot of my family lives in Colorado, and they teach their kids what they need to do if they're going on a hike and if they see a bear or if they see a moose. You might want to look it up, what you have to do if you see a bear. But somehow, Mel shut out this screeching voice in her brain. She did not run or shriek, because if she did that, the grizzly would almost definitely come after her and probably attack. That's what they teach them, is that they need to act as big and as strong and loud as they can. If you've ever heard people banging pots and pans, that's something you can do if you see that bears are around your campsite or something like that. Mom had told her that over and over. Grizzly attacks are very rare. No person had ever been killed by a grizzly in Glacier. In fact, most people who came here never saw one, even if they searched for weeks. Still, Mom always wanted Mel to be prepared for anything. And so now Mel did exactly what Mom had told her to do. As the grizzly slowly rose up onto its hind legs, she didn't look it in the eyes. She didn't want to make it feel threatened. With her eyes glued to the ground, she walked backwards towards the cabin, very slowly. Out of the corner of her eye, Mel saw the grizzly drop back down on all fours. She felt its eyes drilling into her. Its growls and grunts rumbled her ears. Step by shaking step, Mel kept walking backwards. The cabin was only a few yards away, but it seemed like hours before she got there. And then Mel couldn't stop herself. She turned and practically flew up the rickety wooden stairs to the porch. She burst into the cabin and slammed the heavy wooden door shut behind her. Mel, Pop said. He and Kevin were right there on the couch. Pops was reading Kevin his bedtime story. What happened? Mel didn't say anything. She was looking out the small square window in the door. It was very dark outside, but there was enough moonlight to see that there was nothing on the porch. Mel's knees went weak with relief. The bear hadn't followed her. She spun around and locked eyes with Pops. A grizzly, she stammered. Pops put the book down. Where? Right outside. It came out of the woods by the beach, and I thought maybe it followed me. Mel saw the doubt on Pop's face. Are you sure? Pop said. Grizzlies don't bother with people. You know that. Of course I know that, Mel started, but Kevin cut her off. I want to see the grizzly. He leaped off the couch before Mel could stop him. He'd flung open the door, and there it was. Standing on the porch, the grizzly was on all fours staring at her little brother. Kevin! Mel snatched her brother and kicked the door shut with her foot. Then They all stood there for a moment, frozen in shock. Mel couldn't help herself. She held Kevin tight and stepped to the small window. Pops leaned in to look, too. The bear was still there. It was pacing back and forth, sniffling the ground. One moment. Sniffling the ground. There's something wrong with that bear, Pops said. Look how thin it is. Pops was right. The bear was very thin, but its light brown coat seemed to hang off its skeleton. Mel could see the outline of its spine poking up through its fur. Kevin reached out and knocked on the window. Hi, bear! Hi, bear! No, Kevin, don't! Mel warned him, grabbing his hand. Too late. The bear looked at them and slowly rose into its hind legs. Then, with the speed of a striking cobra, the enormous bear lunged at the door. Its giant clawed paw came smashing through the window right towards Kevin's face. Chapter 5. Mel leaped away as the claws whooshed through the air, missing Kevin's cheek by inches. A shard of glass shot into Mel's arm, but she barely noticed the pain. Her eyes were glued to the grizzly's paw. The bear was reaching through the hole in the door, swiping at the air with its pointed white claws. Each claw was at least 3 inches long. Mel tried not to think of what those claws would do to her flesh, or to Kevin's. As if that wasn't horrifying enough, the grizzly thrust its head through the window. Kevin shrieked, and Mel stumbled back. The bear started bashing its paws against the old, rattling door. Its dripping, wet jaws snapped open and closed. A cloud of the bear's steaming breath rushed up Mel's nose. She gagged. It smelled like rotten meat and vomit. Pops grabbed hold of Mel's arm and pulled her back. Go away! He shouted at the grizzly. Mel had never heard her grandfather scream so loudly. And somehow it worked, kind of like banging those pots and pans together. The bear pulled its head out of the door. There was a moment of silence, but then, bam! The entire cabin shook as the bear threw his body against the door. Bam, bam, bam! The wood of the door groaned and cracked. Bam! A lamp crashed to the floor. Bam! The framed picture of little boy Pops fell off the ground. Crash! Between each slam, there was a skin-crawling, screeching noise, like giant fingernails cutting across a chalkboard. The sound of the bear's claws digging into the wood. Kevin was whimpering in fear, burying his head in Mel's neck. She held him tight. What would happen if a grizzly got inside the cabin? Mel looked frantic around their small room, searching for something she could use to fight back. But it was hopeless. Even if they had a loaded rifle within reach, there was no guarantee bullets would stop the grizzly in time. If that grizzly got in there, they were all doomed. Suddenly, Pop snatched up the dinner bell from the table. It was big and made of brass. He shook it hard right in front of the broken window. Clang, clang, clang! The sound was deafening. Kevin put his hands over his ears. They stood there for a second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 5 seconds, waiting for another bam on the door, but the sound never came. Mel held her breath. Pop stood frozen, still holding the bell high in the air. A minute passed. Finally, Pops lowered the bell and let out a big breath. He peered through the broken window. It's gone, he said. Mel stepped up and looked outside. Pops was right. The bear was nowhere in sight, but its deathly stink still hung in the air. I wonder what's going to happen and why the grizzly bear was attacking people when it normally doesn't. I want you to brainstorm some reason it may have done that.